We are the Steinmetz brothers, and we call ourselves the Pseudo Scholars. This podcast is like our schoolhouse, and each week we get to grapple with our own realities by exploring stuff that interests us and challenging what we already think about stuff.
Yeah, we like looking at all types of concepts and ideas and things that are a little more serious, like, what's the whole deal with the mother of all bombs that the U.S. just dropped in the Middle East, and things that are even a little less serious, like why the New England Patriots are going to win the Super Bowl probably again next year. These are the spectrum of ideas that we want to kind of look at, analyze, and break down. We want to challenge our own conventional thinking, and then hopefully we're going to walk away from this session more informed, more stimulated, and inspired.
Each week, we usually dive into pretty academic topics that require quite a bit of research and preparation. This week's a little different. Once a month, we do a beer banter episode where we just talk about whatever is interesting at the moment, and we have a beer virtually from a few thousand miles away. So, little brother, salud from Buenos Aires. Cheers.
Cheers. I'm going with the Blue Moon Belgian White. I'm not really big on the dark, heavy, hoppy beers. So this is kind of smooth and this is kind of up my alley and my beer taste. So,
and I've got Stella Artois because it's about the only choice here in Buenos Aires. Not big on the craft scene. So if you drop by the local supermarket, this is about what you're going to get.
Yeah, not the same kind of consumerism going on in South America.
No, it's a different world. We were talking yesterday on a Sunday, and I was trying to get some beer on a Sunday, and all the grocery stores were closed. I mean, the average everyday grocery store where you're going to get your meat. So we actually had to go out to eat last night because Chelsea couldn't find any meat because the butchers were closed, for example. So it's just a different world than in the United States where you'd expect everything to be open and functioning and on time. In Latin America, things are a little slower paced. Things are a little bit more family oriented, a little bit more communal, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I've noticed that difference, especially even in the corporate world. Not just small businesses that, goodness, they just don't work nearly as much in other parts of the world, like Europe and Australia and Latin and South America. They don't work nearly as much as the U.S. They take the whole month of August off, I think, in Europe, things like that. There's kind of different concepts, different approaches to everyday life and business. But obviously, I know that the U.S. is a huge player economically on the global stage, but I wonder if we're any happier of a people for how much we end up working at our big corporate jobs.
Yeah, there's got to be an economic factor to it. I mean, here in Buenos Aires, when we arrived, it was Carnival time. And so they took 4 days off for Carnival, including the weekend. And then here it's been Easter, and they took another 3 days off, the Thursday, Friday, and then the following Monday as well. So, I mean, you think about like from a business perspective, it must be kind of hard to generate the same sort of productivity when you're giving your people that much time off. And it's just a sort of expectation that people are going to take a lot more time off. For in the US, you get 2 weeks a year, no maternity and paternity leave. I know that's a hot topic these days. And you're kind of right back to the grind. But it's a good question. I feel like in today's world where we're not focused on churning out products on a conveyor belt, what's the requirement for people to be in a cubicle from 9 to 5 and only taking 2 weeks of holiday a year? Don't you think that kind of stifles creativity and innovation a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely think we can be a little over systematic. Now obviously you make a good point. It really depends on the industry that you're in, right? So, I'm in oil and gas, and so we've got product moving through pipelines and terminals and refineries 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there are jobs that have to run on that kind of schedule. It's not the vast majority, and I'm not sure that it's kind of the equity or just we feel like we need to treat everyone similarly, that we want to put everyone into kind of a similar box of working 8 to 5 and putting in your hours and things like that, just for the sake of not causing too much conflict in the workplace.
Yeah, because 8 hours in the coal mine means 8 hours more work than if you were doing no hours of work. And that means more coal is being dug up. So I get it. I get why you got to have a person on time at 7:58 ready to go into the coal mine at 8 a.m. And if they're 5 minutes late, it affects coal production. And there's still a lot of corporations in America today that play on that mindset. I think they'll get left behind or things will start to shift.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. When you're talking about that, it makes me think about Chick-fil-A, who is not open 24 hours a day, opens at like 6 a.m. and closes at 10 p.m. and isn't open on Sunday, but yet they run circles around McDonald's and Wendy's and some of these other places, at least in terms of like like a profit per hour or kind of, some kind of metric that takes into account the amount of hours that you're open. But, we shifted towards this, let's just operate all day in a lot of different industries and attack it. But I really think quality over quantity, wouldn't you say, especially in high thinking types of positions, that you don't really need 60 hours a week to do your best work. Most of the time, we really don't even have that capacity as human beings to do that. If we're honest with ourselves, right? We're doing mediocre work for longer periods of time.
I completely agree. When you're trying to get cognitive skills from a person, you're trying to get a person to think in a challenging way about solving problems, and that requires a lot of hard mental work, intellectual work. When you're trying to get that from a person, I don't think you want to put them in a box. I think you want to put them in position to succeed regardless of what sort of position they like. Some people like to work from home. Some people like to be in a more structured environment. I think the best companies probably let their employees decide to some degree, give them a certain amount of freedom, and hopefully that would make people perform better.
Yeah. No, that's kind of interesting. Although just to challenge it, right? Because that's what we do on these podcasts. We like to challenge things. I think it was the CEO of DuPont, which was, DuPont was a really high tech company at one point in time. And I think they created nylon and did lots of R&D research on materials for manufacturing and things like that. And at one point they bought Conoco. DuPont owned Conoco Incorporated, one of the biggest oil corporations in the world. Anyways, of course, they've since divested that. But I heard our CEO say the other day that the CEO of DuPont, and I'm not sure she's still in that position today. In fact, she may have been fired. But this CEO came on the scene and immediately did away with working from home, and the company just got furious. I mean, they got pissed. And a lot of people were really, really upset because she took away a pretty nice benefit for a lot of these people. But she didn't do it without data, because what they did is they looked back at all of the big breakthroughs that DuPont had, over maybe a period of several decades or something like that, and found that almost all their big breakthroughs came in context of lots of collaboration. So it wasn't really the person sitting at their home in their living room with their feet kicked up in their, in their gym shorts, working on their computer that came up with the next big idea for this company. So anyways, kind of an interesting thing, just to balance things a little bit, that maybe we really do better work when we're around people and we're encouraged and kind of inspired. So I don't know how we kind of live in that balance.
That probably makes sense, especially when you're thinking about a large organization. Lately, I think a lot more about startups and small organizations. But when you're thinking about a larger organization, you can't necessarily guarantee that every single person is 100% committed to what they're doing every single day. They might just be doing it for the paycheck and for the benefits. That added accountability of keeping people in one location, and then the collaboration of people, face to face. But that's what we're doing right now, and we're thousands of miles away. So I think there's ways to do it now with technology, but that is an interesting study. Hey, speaking of people that don't work from home, NASA. It's a good transition. There was actually only one headline story that I cared a ton about this week, or in the last 2 weeks. It was the big news from NASA. So very infrequently, NASA kind of puts together these big secretive presentations, and there's a bit of build up, and sometimes the president attends. And in this case, I think Trump was there, and NASA announces some big new finding or whatever. But in this case, they were announcing some of the findings from the Cassini aircraft, or the spacecraft. So the Cassini spacecraft was launched during the Clinton administration, and its mission was to get out to Saturn. We'd never really had good close-up visuals on Saturn. And so here's something that some astronomers are saying about the findings from the Cassini spaceship that's been flying around Saturn for the last few months or something like that. They're saying that this moon called Enceladus, which is off of Saturn, they have various moons, but this one particular moon called Enceladus has the best possibility of any place we've ever identified in our solar system to sustain life. Yep, exactly. So basically, this moon shoots salt water out of cracks of ice, and they've discovered hydrogen and other hydrothermal activity. And so it's pretty likely that it could sustain life as far as we know it. Now, it's it's very far away. I'm not exactly sure how far away Saturn is, but it's far. So what does it mean for us? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the planets get exponentially further as you move away from the sun. So the distance between like Neptune and Pluto is larger than that of the first, 8 planets from Neptune to Mercury or something like that. So probably a little ways away, but that's cool. I think that's something that a lot of more progressive types of individuals, especially people that are kind of bigger into futuristic scientific exploration and things like that, are actually probably pretty happy with Mr. Trump on his commitment to spending with NASA and
I've been
just
shocked.
really what that represents, right? Because I think that's a great. I mean, when you think about the structure that we have set up in the U.S. and really in colleges across the globe, where we literally just we give money, right? They write applications for grants so that the government will give them money to study whatever it is that they want to study, as long as they can justify that it has some kind of functional purpose for people at some point down the line. It's really cool because even though a lot of those dollars probably never get realized, or at least not in the short term, it's just this idea. To me, it's the principle of us continuing to try to drive forward and figure out what's next for people. And obviously space exploration is becoming a hotter topic than it's been in really several decades, right?
Yeah, but you took my soapbox away from me, so I don't think I need to reinforce that anymore. Completely agree with you that it's an important area of progress. And for people who don't and think it's just about us, I don't know, expecting our egos to grow a bit when we learn a little bit more about what's out there. The reality is that we develop a lot of our scientific breakthroughs by understanding what's going on in the solar system and understanding how physics and particle physics and cosmology intersect. And we've discovered like tons of medical breakthroughs that you and I are aware of today. Like there's some relation to the antibiotics that we're taking today that was first found when people were able to look at the stars and recognize some of the particle changes in the way stars happen when they break. And you learn a little bit about how the mass of a star is. And next thing you know, it kind of like feeds into an idea. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess where I would settle in on that is trying to live in the balance or trying to live in the tension between, 100 years down the road and what kind of breakthroughs we can have to improve human life, while also spending time and money focusing on problems that are maybe more primitive in nature, and maybe problems that we've already solved but we haven't figured out, like distribution problems, right? Like there are people dying places of the world from diseases that we know how to cure, or from ailments that we know how to cure. So I'm actually a big fan of Bill Gates in that space. What his foundation has done is really tremendous. So I don't know if people know about Bill and Melinda Gates. Obviously, he's the CEO of Microsoft, and he started the biggest software company in the world and the richest man in the world, or I guess it depends on when you look at the list based on the price of a share of Microsoft or something like that. But Bill and Melinda Gates, I was watching this documentary on them, and he runs his charitable organization like a business. I mean, he was a ruthless CEO that oftentimes was getting scolded by the SEC for trying to, corner the software world and buy up a bunch of his competitors and create a monopolistic market. But because he carries his skills and his focus and drive from competitive business model into charitable organizations, he's able to make those dollars stretch like certain people are not able to make them stretch. And so he started this really cool thing called the Billionaire Pledge, right, where he's gone out and solicited all these billionaires and said, hey, will you pledge 50% of your net worth by the time that you die and give it to my foundation? And so Warren Buffett made a one-time gift of I don't know, it's like $50 billion or something. I mean, check my numbers on that, plus or minus 10 billion, but I believe it was the largest charitable donation in the history of the world. And it
those
doubled.
Guys are bros, right?
Huh?
Warren and Bill are bros.
Yes, they're bros. But this documentary made this unbelievable claim. It said that Bill Gates has done more to promote education and technology in third world countries and medical research and kind of all this holistic healing and advancement that he promotes, has done more in his time on the earth than the entire federal government does in their entire existence, because he's just brilliant, and he's taken his gifts and applied them to many, many, many problems in the world. So anyways, it's somewhere in the middle there, right? And I think we both agree on that we need to have some kind of balance with looking towards the future while also not neglecting the problems of today.
Yeah. Speaking of problems of today, man, I was excited about the spacecraft story, but there was another story in the news that this one will get me riled up, and you can pull me back down to reality here, Cade. But did you hear about this gender mutilation case? There's 2 Michigan doctors, right, who are now charged with performing gender mutilation on 7-year-old girls. And I'm going to describe what that is, because it's just that shocking, and people need to know, I need to be reminded of this. This is happening in the United States. So basically, mothers of these two girls convinced their daughters that they were going on a girls' trip to Detroit. They're from some suburban town inside Michigan. And the mothers get their two daughters, 7-year-old daughters, put them in a car, drive them to Detroit. And while they're in Detroit on their girls' trip, they stop by a doctor's office where they have part of their clitoris membrane removed. A very painful process. And the purpose of this? Do you know the purpose of this? Just to suppress sexuality in young women. So it's a shocking behavior, right? And it's a ritual. And then basically what they do is they bury part of the removed body part in a ceremony. So the idea is that you're like burying your sexual desires or your sexual promiscuity. And it all ties back to this religious behavior or practice that was not necessarily found in the Quran, but it was found in Hadith teachings from Muhammad. So this is very common practice in like Muslim regions across Africa and other parts of the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So the term they use for it is called the Sunnah, and it means the path that Prophet Muhammad took. And while Muhammad didn't say it was a required mandate that all girls do this, he said it was noble. So there's these strict Islamic sects that are performing this thing on women today. Not even women, girls, 7-year-old girls.
7-year-olds.
So when the investigators caught this happening, I think they must have been tipped or they had an idea. And so they were kind of stalking the facility. And then they went in right when this was happening or something like that. And they took the girls and they asked the young girls about their experience. The girls couldn't walk afterwards. And they had pain all the way through their legs and into their feet for weeks. And this is a behavior that they're performing. This is happening in the United States. About 500,000 girls are susceptible to gender mutilation in the United States.
So the parents, the two mothers were pro this, right? They drove them up there. Okay. And the
mothers
were they Islamic doctors?
Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine a non-Islamic doctor performing that kind of. Oh my gosh.
Isn't that shocking? So they're part of a pretty small kind of radical sect, but they're actually these people are all Indian. They're of an Indian Islamic sect, probably somewhere in Western India. And so these two doctors have been charged with this, and they've probably performed 50 to 100 gender mutilation cases on 7-year-old girls from this Islamic sect.
Wow.
In Michigan.
Wow.
This isn't happening in the Sudan, where it's also also happening in Somalia and Indonesia and other kind of wilder places of the world. This is Michigan.
Wow. I've never heard of that teaching before. And just for people that may not know, so the Quran is obviously kind of the Islamic equivalent of the Bible, right? The kind of inspired word. The claim is that Allah revealed himself to Muhammad in a cave and told him word for word. That's kind of an interesting difference. Word for word in Arabic, what the revealed word of God was. But so it's not claimed in the Quran. It's claimed in the Hadith.
It's not in the Quran.
The Hadith, which is kind of like the equivalent of.
It's not in the Quran, but it's a captured Hadithic teaching that's attributed to Muhammad, the Prophet
Right.
Muhammad, the same guy.
So the Hadith is really just like a word for traditional teachings that are passed on over time that are kind of like doctrine from imams or from religious leaders, and they propagate that. But that's unbelievable. I did not know.
So it's not a required activity, but a noble activity.
Wow.
To suppress these women's sexuality, presumably so I know they'll be, I don't know what the cause or the initiation of this was. And I should back up and say that like this isn't really happening in Saudi Arabia and some of the more like, or the United Arab Emirates, like the more, I don't even know if you call Saudi Arabia progressive, but the more structured Islamic doctrinal regions of the world, I don't think this is happening as frequently. These are a bit of extremist sects that are performing it. But if you look at a map, look at up the World Health Organization of where gender mutilation is taking place on women, and there's varying degrees of what they do. Sometimes they just use a grinding tool. Sometimes they, no kidding, chop the clitoris off. There's varying spectrums. Yeah, no kidding. But this is happening all across like the central northern regions of Africa and Southeast Asia, and in Michigan, United States.
Wow.
That's not something to get fired up about, some crazy doctrinal teachings that has these board certified emergency room doctors. They're both board certified emergency room doctors, never had a rap. So that, that's one of the things their lawyer is trying to defend them on. By
Yeah.
all accounts, they're upstanding citizens. They just have this really ridiculous belief that 7-year-old girls should have their clitorises chopped off for religious purposes.
Wow. Yeah, it kind of brings up an interesting challenge for the federal government as we move towards a more progressive society that obviously wants to be respective of all religious beliefs, and that's one of the the primary foundational building blocks, the pillars of American society, which I think is really unique and an amazing thing that you don't see in other parts of the world. But you're going to hit these gray areas. Well, I don't mean it to be gray as in what these doctors did to these girls is gray. That's black and white. But just how you regulate different religious beliefs when they push the envelope of what is just kind of self-evidently wrong to people, like that, just kind of a law of nature that tells you that something is twisted and wrong about that. But
right. But fortunately, the United States government doesn't back down on something like this. It was actually the mosque where both of the family members, the mothers that attend and the doctor that attends this mosque, the mosque made some kind of public statement like, we recognize that the native land in which we're practicing our practice, has certain laws and we have to obey those laws. So they didn't downright disown the behavior, which is scary because thousands of people are attending this mosque and believe in its teachings. But they also said that, hey, we got to play by the rules. So this was wrong to do it in the United States.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But hey, this kind of, now you're helping me transition into another big topic of the day. I mean, France had its presidential election yesterday, and they went against the populism, totalitarianism, nationalism, Trump Brexit, despite all the fears of immigration. I mean, immigration being the primary topic that was propping up Marine Le Pen and the Brexit Trumpism types. They went the other way. They went for the centrist, the pro-EU types.
Oh, wow.
Surprising.
Interesting. So a more moderate figure.
Yeah, a more moderate figure. I mean, Marine Le Pen was starting to spark a ton of interest. A lot of people were thinking, she's another, whatever the prime minister in England is, May. I'm forgetting her name. I think her last name's May. They're hosting an election in June. And then a Trump, somebody who's kind of scared on immigration in the sense that they want to hold this more nationalistic front, certainly as it relates to Islamic immigration, and France, who's experienced as much hardship as a result of Islamic immigration as anywhere else in terms of terrorist attacks.
Right.
We thought they might go in line with that, but they've resisted that, and they're gone to the more centrist play. We'll see what happens with that.
Let's talk a little bit about that because obviously it depends on which news source you're getting your information from. But the 100 days of Trump being in office is coming up here soon, right? So for whatever reason,
I think we're at it.
Yeah. Maybe we're right at it, but it's kind of a time for the progress report of the president. What has he accomplished so far? So let's talk just a little bit about that, right? Because the Republicans really seem to fall flat on their face when it came to a new healthcare bill, which was a huge platform of the Republican Party, right? And enough people, I think, in the United States knew that we need some kind of healthcare reform. And I actually, as a more conservative person, still think that what Obama did was kind of similar to what we've said Elon Musk has done, is he pushed the ball forward, right? He got something out there that was going to cover tons of people that weren't insured, and then we can refine that over time. That's great. Let's get it better and better over time. So he's kind of failed in the healthcare reform spot. I think militaristically, with some of the actions taken recently, has shown some strength and actually unified the two parties in a way that I hadn't really seen lately. Like, I mean, you have big, I think Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, big faces of the left wing, Democratic Party, affirming what Trump has done with some of his militaristic moves. And then probably lastly, the big talking point for Trump's 100-day report card is getting Neil Gorsuch pushed through the Supreme Court. So what do you kind of think about those issues? What are you grading out the American president at so far?
I don't know if I'm qualified to do that, in the sense that I'm not paying as much attention to him as I would have been if I was living in the United States. I'm a bit of a citizen of the world at this point, and so kind of interested in what's going on in politics in Buenos Aires. So I haven't been totally focused, but my impressions, if they're accurate, are that the Gorsuch play, I don't know if is as much a success on his part. Certainly the selection of the candidate seemed to be fairly appropriate, but mostly it was a sense that the strong Republican Congress was going to push that through, regardless of what happened there. So I don't know if he gets a ton of credit for that. I don't think he's a bad candidate, to be honest. The pro-life, pro-choice thing is where things get a little iffier for me. I know less so for you. But otherwise, it seems to be that he's a candidate who plays by the law, pun intended. What do you think about Gorsuch?
So I think Gorsuch is a Harvard law graduate and then a Cambridge or Oxford postgraduate studies. But I talked to my buddy Chris Burkhalter, who is getting ready to graduate from Harvard Law School in like a couple weeks, and just asked him his opinion. And Burke is a pretty moderate guy, very level-headed and kind of a centrist in a lot of respects. And he really likes Gorsuch. And what I've read about him, I really like, not necessarily because his views are always – I mean, everyone's views are always going to land them on one side or the other of the political aisle, especially on the kind of the big polarizing divisive issues like being pro-life or abortion and marital rights for lesbians and homosexuals and things like that. But from all accounts, this guy is a scientist of the law, if there ever was one, right? It's not science, but he really does seem like a man of consistent integrity, and I would say somewhat similar to Antonin Scalia. So obviously the pro-lifers and people that are against abortion, like myself, and the Republican Party count this as a big win. So of course I'm not saying that Trump is some genius, right? He got a list of the top candidates that evangelicals would want, and he made good on his promise to the electorate that put him in office. So I do think that he deserves some credit, because that is one of the biggest issues that people that obviously recognize that Trump isn't an ideal candidate, but looked to the other side and saw, Miss Hillary over there as not another non-ideal candidate. They really are voting more on a moral basis. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court gets to decide what morality is for the entire country. So I've got to give him some kind of underhanded credit in that respect, even though you're right. It was the Republican Congress that amended the law to make it less than 60 votes to push Neil Gorsuch, affirmation through.
Fair assessment. As far as I understand, he's like a strict constitutionalist, a guy who interprets the Constitution. If you're a constitutionalist, that's what you want. I don't know where I fall on that, because the Constitution's a 250-year-old plus document, and I think the world has changed. So where you get into this loose for strict interpretations of the Constitution, I'm just kind of probably comfortable saying I don't know enough, but I'm not terribly unhappy with the Gorsuch play, largely because I think he's a good replacement for Scalia. I like balance in the court. To me, that makes sense. To me, I think I know what's right, but the reality is I'm often probably wrong, so it's good to have the opposite opinion, equal in terms of its stature when we're discerning a big outcome that's going to influence all of the Americans. So for me, I'm okay with the Gorsuch play. And also, as you say, in terms of foreign policy, he puts his foot in his mouth, and we're not so sure about the Secretary of State yet. That's yet to be played out. But in terms of military actions, I mean, he's just doing what General Mattis says. And so from that regard, I have all respects. General Mattis is not a warmonger. He's the kind of guy who knows how to escalate power and show force when necessary and respond or lead on an international stage using military force when it's necessary. And it's necessary in a place like Syria, who's committing genocidal behaviors, whose own president is committing genocidal behaviors against the old people and women and children, his own citizenship, right, with chemical weapons. So when we go in and jack them up right afterwards, no innocents are killed. Like, I think that's a healthy, active response. And to Russia, we say, all right, step up. That's where things are going to become far more interesting, I think, is the relationship with Trump and Russia. And I don't just mean the insider stuff, which we don't really know if it's true or not yet. That'll play itself out. I mean more of a positioning play. Is he going to back down from Putin on Syria, or is he going to push the pace and show that we are the leader in the world in determining what is right and what's wrong?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic. One thing I've been thinking a lot about recently too is, how would I govern? And obviously, Shane, I'm a Christian, and I spend a lot of time in the evangelical circles. So you have obviously people that have religious beliefs about how we ought to deal with certain situations, But what I think I've concluded is that my views as an individual often differ from what I think my views would be if I was a governing, agent. Just based on responsibilities, based on the power of the office that I would be in, and so, albeit I think it's awful that people are having to lose their lives, right, and that we're dropping bombs, and that terrible things can happen, and no one doubts that. No one is saying that those aren't terrible things, but it's kind of a complex ethics question. Is, we dropped the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we ended the war. And how many more lives would have had to be lost? And honestly, I think we ought to have some grace and show it towards those who are governing officials, because let's be honest, they're making really, really hard decisions. And I believe that they are hard for them. And so in these moral realms where it's a little bit gray and individualistically, it's just not a good kind of comparison to make anecdotally about what about this individual person as a mother, that I'm just not sure that that's the right way to look at it. But anyways, I definitely think it's been unifying.
Perhaps on some issues. I think domestic policy is where things are still a bit of a catastrophe. You're right. Healthcare was a bomb. The immigration policy, regardless of whether people agree with it or not, has had negative consequences internationally, and in general hasn't had a lot of good popular standing. I think that the idea of just going out and picking 7 countries and then eliminating all immigration from those 7 countries, even if you're a PhD coming to do chemical studies at Berkeley, like that one PhD who got rejected. He was coming to his big conference every year and he was a speaker. He got rejected because he was from Iran. Like some of these cases are a little outrageous, and I think that policy blew up in his face completely. And as far as I know, it's not an act anymore. All the attorneys general have overthrown it. So on the domestic side, I think that's where the report card slips. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with you there.
Although we have to talk about business, even though you and I will run our mouths a bit on business. I mean, stock market still seems to be high. In terms of people's outlooks on the economy, most people are thinking that it's quite good. We'll see how many jobs he brings back. That's where I'll really draw a line in the sand with him when he tries to bring back foreign manufacturing jobs, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ways to slice it and to look at it. I like your point about what people's outlook is on the economy and future growth. But because the fact of the matter is, the number one factor that drives economic growth is spending, consumer confidence. How confident am I as a consumer to take my dollars and put it into the stock market, to buy property, to invest in businesses, all those kind of things, because I think that there's going to be a great return. I'm bullish about the market. So, it's a little bit more abstract. It's not a science. How do people decide whether or not they're confident or not? I mean, sometimes the word Republican and Democrat changes that conversation just because of associated outlooks on different types of policies. So it's kind of interesting. But Shane, I'm not sure we've talked about this before, but having been raised in a conservative home in the South, right, where most everyone is conservative and votes straight line Republican. Obama became president when I was 16 years old. And I remember it very clearly, this racial divide that I'd never seen before at Prattville High School all of a sudden arise the day after the election. And I just never knew that America was so divided over race. And then for 8 years, the Republican Congress and Senate did everything they could to lie down and prevent Obama from doing really anything and from passing policies, which enforced him to kind of, move with more executive power and things that, of course, they also criticize. So it's just been interesting to me to see a totally Democratic and liberal run government for most of the 8 years, right? And mostly liberal policies. And some of the most liberal policies we've ever seen, like socialized medicine, or moving towards, government healthcare. But what's cool to me is this gives me an opportunity to run the experiment, right? The tables have turned, the Republicans are in power, and will there be any difference? I mean, unfortunately, as a young person, this is probably going to affect my faith in government for a really, really long time to see, all right, I've been told that Republican and conservative policies are better for business. They're better for the general population. So let's see if they work. And obviously 100 days isn't enough time to see whether or not those policies are going to make any difference. But I'm interested to see that. But I'm definitely against some of the things that Trump's doing, like the 40% tariff on foreign goods. I am not for that.
Me neither. We don't have to talk about the globalization factor too much. Maybe we'll do a specific episode on that, but we'll continue to follow his progress. Maybe we'll do a report card every week as best we can. Without being experts, we can at least do our best to play according to episode 2 and recognize that the media has a big bias and an agenda that they're throwing at us on every single topic. And you're berated with it every single day. So like trying to be sure that you're seeing things holistically and impartially and not focused on one particular agenda, and ensuring that Trump, that's something I have to be careful about, because I'm a guy who's very anti-Trump. I have to be careful not to just hope for his demise and seek out ways to ensure that in my book he's failing. So we'll do our best to be balanced, and we'll continue to assess him over the coming months.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, so just to transition into a little bit more lighthearted topic, or maybe it's actually not as lighthearted now that I'm thinking about it. But have you seen, obviously with the NFL draft coming up, I think it might be tomorrow or some point this week. It's about to come up anyways. And have you seen all of the players, I think it's been several of them now, that had diluted urine samples at their drug examinations? Have you seen that?
No, what's the deal?
So I haven't read about it, but essentially what I've seen is that the gist of what I understand is that they found ways to dilute their urine samples. I don't know if they completely swapped it or they added water or whatever. They took a drug that would dilute their samples, and they're now all popping positive for marijuana and things like that. So it's Reuben Foster and there was another player. I can't remember who it was, but Reuben Foster was, the Blitnikoff winner and the number 1 linebacker in the country this year from Auburn, Alabama, who went to the University of Alabama. And they're saying he's going to drop maybe 2nd or 3rd round now because of this diluted urine sample. Pretty funny.
Are you saying that they're diluting their samples because they know that there's foreign substances that would be illegal?
No, I haven't read that, but that's obviously that's inferred from the article's headings that I've seen, because there's no other reason that they would be trying to do this. But essentially, it's players that are still doing drugs. And let's try to table the marijuana conversation for now. I want to focus mainly on these athletes, right? Because Booger McFarland, who was like an All-American defensive tackle at LSU, and now he's on ESPN. He just says, like, I can't understand how these athletes can't make good decisions. Like how could they be so silly at the NFL Combine, right? These guys are all about to become millionaires, and all their dreams are about to come true, and they would do something so foolish.
Well, I think there's 2 stories here that I would be clear to differentiate on, and they're both worth a different discussion point on. The first is performance-enhancing drugs. Were these guys at the last minute doing whatever it took to get them to the next level? Because we're talking about, running 0.4 seconds faster or something on a 40-yard dash, and therefore increasing their potential of getting drafted and making all this extra money and all those things. So are they talking about performance drugs? Or are we talking about recreational drugs like marijuana, which are silly, the fact that they'd be tested on and these guys would get dinged for smoking marijuana? But if we're talking about just recreational drugs and they know they're not allowed, I would completely agree with that guy, Booker. What a silly decision to make at this point in juncture in your life.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to get some information from here so we can try to have an educated conversation. But Jabril Peppers, who was like the All-American, sorry about that, who was the All-American in Michigan, it just says that he had a diluted urine sample, but I'm pretty sure it's for recreational drugs. I'm pretty sure.
Then that's just ridiculous. Yeah, these guys. I mean, don't they already have agents and stuff, like staying on top of their asses and being like, look, buddy, like, you're not going out to party tonight. You're running the NFL Combine tomorrow.
It's really amazing, but I kind of want to take this down to a little bit of a deeper level and have a serious conversation. Because on the surface, we're like, come on, what are you doing, right? This is Jabril Peppers, who is an All-American, and Reuben Foster. I mean, come on, guys. Like, their teams are hiring Harvard psychologists to do psychoanalysis on you. You don't think they're going to get you for for smoking dope. Like it's simple in that regard. But there was a documentary that came out on YouTube. I don't know, 6 months or 6 months ago or something, and sorry, on Netflix. And it was called Second Chance University, and it was about this junior college in Scuba, Mississippi, that was this place, this breeding ground for future Division I stars and major colleges that would go on and play in the NFL. So they won like 3 national championships, and they were a big pipeline, and they were basically a place for kids that got in trouble or got kicked out of school or couldn't make the grades, and they need to go to Scuba, Mississippi. And it's a great documentary. I encourage people to watch it. But what was really interesting to me is there's a defensive tackle on that program, and there was a woman that worked in the compliance office at the junior college, and her whole job was to know every single football player, to know what their schedules were, to know what their assignments were, and essentially to hold their hand and walk them through junior college. Because everything that's going to preclude these guys is pretty much happening off the field, right? It's nothing about what's happening on the field. So these cameras were following these guys, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And she would go and explain to a kid. She would sit him down and she would say, if you don't go to class, you're going to get your 5th absence. If you get your 5th absence, that's an automatic fail. If you fail this class, you're not going to graduate. If you don't graduate, you're not going to be eligible to play scholarship to LSU or Auburn or Alabama is not going to go through, right? She clearly explains it, says, go to class. And then he leaves the classroom and walks straight out the door and says, man, I'm going home. And so it's like, it's almost hard to comprehend how they can't understand, really simple consequences decisions. It's like there's such short pleasure from not going to class or smoking a little dope that they can't think past the future or to a more future place where this is all going to pay off. And it's really, really interesting. And then of course you feel a little more guilty for judging some of these guys when you hear about their backgrounds and you hear that this particular player had a father that came into his trailer where he grew up, shot his mom in the face, and then shot himself in the face in front of the 5-year-old kid, right? And he had a traumatic event. But I just kind of want to open up the dialogue for topics like why we worship athletes way too much, why they're not held to standards of true accountability, and why we see such foolish decisions made by this particular group of people.
I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that we put them on a pedestal. So they've been praised for 4 years at some big-time university, and they've got all the prettiest girlfriends, and they're the most popular guy on campus. They show up to class, and people are taking Snapchat videos of them. Their professors want their autographs, and maybe they feel, larger than life, and they feel like they're due and they're deserving of this next level, and they're willing to cut corners. I mean, I wonder if there's a bit of that, but there's certainly some poor judgments being made, but these are young guys. And when I think about how old I was and the decisions I was making around the time that those guys are trying to make their way into the combine, granted, I'd probably matured a little bit faster than that, but there is a maturation process. And if you haven't had your hand held by 2 good parents the way you and I have, possibly you just don't ever come to recognize how your decisions have enormous consequences on your future. And so it's the prefrontal cortex we know that functions in the sense of evaluating rational decisions and thinks about consequences and thinks about the future. And if it's not as developed for some particular reason, perhaps these kids just don't see it. I don't know. Is it deeper than that?
I would absolutely say that there is some kind of biological consequence. And even if it's just sociological, it doesn't matter. There's a real problem with why you can look at certain demographics, certain ethnic groups, certain groups of people like athletes that have, characteristics of how they grew up, and you see this disproportionate inability to make wise decisions. And you've got to say, we know it's not about the color of people's skin. We know it's not about, like purely biological means. Obviously, I think some of those are affected by sociological circumstances over time. But essentially, I've just come to see that if you've not been taught how to make decisions, if you've not at an early age learned very simple disciplines like it sucks to get up early, but when I get up early, I'm able to prepare for class. And when I can prepare for class, I can make better grades because I'm paying more attention. When I make better grades, it's going to ultimately lead me to what I believe is a brighter future. And I think you and I grew up in a family where we always believed that the future was going to be better than our present. We always believed we were going to be progressing towards something better. And so when there's a glass ceiling, whether or not it is imposed by discriminatory laws and authorities, or if it's purely psychological, it is a real glass ceiling that it seems that a lot of these guys are encountering. And really, we're talking about something much bigger than athletes, but I think that if you can't see past the momentary pleasures of today, it just is a maturation process. So we're really treating 22-year-old guys that look like men. They're the size of men. They seem to be like men, but really they're like 12, 13, 14-year-old kids in their mind and in their ability to make decisions and in their ability to make wise choices. And so I don't know. It's really, really challenging because I think about balancing justice and mercy, when it comes to holding these guys accountable. I'm not sure what the right path forward is.
I think about John Jones. Got to go to the UFC for a second because he's the light heavyweight, or had been formerly the light heavyweight champion for a series of title defenses. By this point in his career, would certainly be the greatest fighter to ever step foot inside the cage. And he's continued to make terrible decisions time and time again. He's had a professional psychologist and psychiatrist travel with him, an agent who walks over him, and he still makes these horrific decisions. The most recent hit and run, or performance enhancing drugs, or there's just countless decisions that are being made. So evaluating why guys are making decisions like this when they recognize that the future is ahead of them and that they have so much unlimited potential that the rest of us could never potentially have. We never have the potential capabilities of a John Jones physically. We just don't. We weren't born with it, you and I. But John Jones was born with it. He's demonstrated it. He's earned massive amounts of fame and popularity and money because of it. And presumably he wants to retain it, but there's just something in him that chooses to piss it all away. It's almost like he just wants to see what happens. It's almost like he's willing to just test and see if he can't continue to do both at the same time. I don't really understand it, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty complex. It's pretty deep. I mean, what we're talking about, this whole topic right now. I would absolutely affirm that at least part of it is this disappointment that people experience when they reach unbelievable amounts of success, and it's what they've been training for their whole life. And there's this really challenging reality that says tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have to brush my teeth and I'm going to have to put on my underwear, and the thrill of winning the big game, or the thrill of throwing the final KO punch is going to be diminished to some degree. Or maybe if it's not the next day, it's going to be overtime. It's going to change. So I think that there's some of that. There's that letdown that just leads to people to acting out in other ways to search for other kind of answers to deep problems that they feel inside. And I think another part of it is just massive amounts of insecurity. So it's really interesting because how secure a person is in the way that they're raised and their self-esteem and just the affirmation that they have dignity and value as a human being is really, really foundational to the way they make choices. So I can tell you about this guy that we had that came and did a consulting class for our company on leadership. And he played for the Buffalo Bills for 5 years. He was a big star in the NFL. He ended up not doing well in school and kind of losing a lot of his intellectual ability because in 3rd grade, he distinctly remembers sitting outside of his classroom and he could overhear his teacher talking to his mom at a conference and said, your son just doesn't have the ability to do this kind of work. And from then on, it just struck him and it wounded him in such a way that he basically said, I can't identify as a student anymore. I can't be a student anymore. That's obviously not what I am in life. So therefore, I'm just going to throw everything I have into this other form of identity like sports. So he literally thought all of my value is tied to sports. So then he goes to the NFL, plays for 5 years, gets hurt, and stops, and then he ruins his marriage. He becomes an alcoholic. He has all these kind of devastating things because he doesn't have any idea of self-value and self-worth. And so I think that's the kind of context that a lot of these athletes happen to grow up in, and it just leads to devastating decisions. And then they ultimately have to be held accountable to the justice system. And then you think, gosh, would I be in that exact same spot were I raised in the same circumstances?
So you're saying it's developmental. If there's a series of important wickets that a person hits while they're developing biologically, physiologically, psychologically, and something goes awry in that process, and you don't have the stability to fall back on, the self-confidence that your parents are instilling in you at home or something like that, things can go just drastically off course. Interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's at least part of it. I mean, I think that, like, especially if you look at the demographic of young African American males, and I spent a lot of time in the Third Ward in inner city Houston coaching at a ministry called the Forge for Families. So we have a lot of these young Black guys that are raised in single parent homes and in really tough circumstances. And let me just tell you one example, and it ought to shatter your heart into a million pieces. But there was a 12-year-old boy on another team and a coach I knew. And the kid's always tired. He's always sleepy. So he goes and he asks the mother one day, the coach does, and says, "Hey, Jamal is always tired. Is he not getting enough sleep? Is there something going on at home? Has he got some stress?" Come to find out, this kid is living with 10 other children in like a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And I think his mother may have worked the night shift or had to sleep so that she could go to work the next day. So he was up all night doing feedings to a newborn infant at 12 years old.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine this, like the domino effect that has on a person's life, right? And he can't focus in school, and he acts out because he's really, really tired and he's irritable. So then they think he's a problem child when it's really just this circumstance at home. Or he's got so much on his plate he can't study for the test, or he doesn't get the proper nutrition. So he comes into class and he's tired and he's not eating well. And we all know that a lot of those factors are huge contributing factors when it comes to someone's success. So it's just amazing how we oversimplify some of these problems, and we don't really see that a lot of it is sociological in the circumstances that you were raised in. And of course, I would argue that a lot of this is spiritual and there's something deeper going on here. But at the very least, that evidence is shown in a lot of scientific data.
Wait, what evidence?
The evidence about, like,
the spiritual evidence?
No. I'm saying
what did
from
you
the
say?
Sociological things.
All right. Okay.
I'm saying the evidence from growing up in a one-parent home or growing up without a certain amount of funds to for testing or for tutoring or things like that.
Wow. The single parent home versus the 2-parent home is one of the most shocking statistics you see when you look at the outcome of the child. That is a pretty striking one.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. But then just to hit a little bit more on this athlete worship that we're just stuck in, really as a, I mean, I think it's globally, but almost more specific and precise inside of the United States. But there's something, I think there's something wrong when at schools and at colleges and all of these, especially in adolescence, that the kid that's going to be the most popular kid in school, the kid that's going to have his trophy hanging up in the center stage when you walk in at the entrance to the organization or university or whatever, is always going to be a statue of an athlete. It's never going to be a statue of some guy that has done some kind of brilliant academic work. And so I wonder if over time we're going to see a lot of diminishing opportunities for people that are really, really smart and gifted, but feel like they have to drive towards something else that's really more valued by our society. What do you think?
Oh, no, that's a very good point. It really hasn't been since, Greco-Roman times when we esteemed educators to the same degree as the professional athlete. I'm hearing that that's starting to shift a little bit in Northern Europe. In Northern Europe now, high school teachers are coming from the top 10% of public school systems, whereas in the United States, we know that we get our public teachers from the bottom 10% of public school systems. Not to offend anyone, but that certainly isn't the proportionality we're looking at that we want when we're talking about educating our future. And I think today is as critically a time to start esteeming educators as ever before, because we're having to educate this next generation in subject matters that weren't even subjects 50 years ago. When we talk about science and technology, as we frequently do in this podcast, I think in order for, I mean, actually, Jack Ma just talked about this. The CEO of Alibaba, the guy who created Alibaba, which is kind of like the Amazon for suppliers out in China. They IPO'd at the highest IPO in the history of American initial public offerings. The CEO of Alibaba says like a major wave of educational reform needs to take place as soon as possible, because these incoming challenges that are about to hit us with the advancements of technology are critical. And if we're getting our teachers from the bottom 10% of the education structure, we're just not considering our teachers as important. And that is really scary.
No, that's great. I do have a father-in-law who's a principal of an elementary school, and actually a really high-performing one in the state. So it's interesting to ask him some of his opinions. But I'm curious, Shane. Let me put you in the role or in the shoes of a public school administrator, right, where you have a little bit more limited opportunity to affect change. Let's say all those rules go out the window. You're starting a school. What is the number one thing you're doing to recruit teachers?
Ooh, that's a good question. Whether it's, oh, wow, very good question. I think you have to show, well, I'm not sure if the question is about recruitment of teachers, because I'm not going to defer your question. I'll come back to it. But I think the point that I was making is that the pool right now isn't satisfactory. And that's because we don't consider 7th grade teachers to be as important as professional athletes. So that's why I was reinforcing that idea. So the public school administrator is in a tough position right now because the pool of educators isn't as sufficient as it ought to be in the United States. Now, to get back to your question of how do we at least incentivize the best teachers so that the best school systems, I mean, the school systems that need it the best or have the best public administrators achieve and acquire the best talent, I think you have to show them that there's the most opportunity to do good. So it's not necessarily, hey, we have the best technology, or hey, we have the best, pay and salary cap, and you're going to work the least amount of hours and get the most holidays. I think you show them that you have the biggest opportunity to influence young people, and you're going to have freedom to run your curriculum the way you need to run it. And, children are going to be disciplined, and you're going to come into a school system where you're going to be respected. I don't know, something like that. What say you?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's only part of the way there, though, because ultimately I think most people that I know that are really, really smart, that are going to go major in mechanical engineering or computer science or something like that, know that it's about maximizing their opportunity to make money. I mean, that's just the world that we live in. Money is a huge, huge factor. So I think that not to address that is kind of asking for benevolence from people that economically people are just too rational to fall for that. I hate to say it.
But how do you explain the charter school system and the success of the charter school system? Because
they pay a lot more.
Teachers are they paying a lot?
Yes.
My understanding is they're not. Okay, I must be misinformed then.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that charter schools are paying are a lot higher, and part of it is because when you introduce free market concepts and education becomes a product that you are, I hate to say selling, because I think we both disagree that it should be a purely competitive market product, but for to some sense you are. And guess what? That's happening no matter what. That's happening right now in a public school system. Public schools are selling, and guess what? You can see it in housing prices, right? People are shopping themselves around to the best schools. It's like the number one factor for where people live, especially in a city like Houston, where there's gentrification and you can drive into a poor neighborhood and 2 minutes later be in $1 million homes. That is the number one factor that is causing people to move to the places that they are, is what kind of quality schools that are there, which has a lot to do with funding and tax and property taxes and things like that.
The money has to be there. I'm not saying we shouldn't be incentivizing our teachers. I don't think it's the number one influencer. And actually, Kate, I've just fact checked you, and it looks like you're wrong. Traditional public school teachers' salary in 2016 was $53,000, and in charter schools it was $44,000. So you can double fact check me if you want, but it looks like charter schools, I'm pretty confident in this. I thought I had looked into this recently. And charter schools aren't necessarily, like in Harlem, New York, the charter schools are excelling, and they're not paying their teachers as much as the Brooklyn public school system, for example.
And, you're right. I thought I saw and maybe it was something different in Washington D.C. where they were running a trial. But anyways,
that was nationally. But I'm not disagreeing that we need to incentivize the education system better. I mean, we need better public school administrators, but I think it starts with the educators. It starts with the people who are spending their time day in and day out with our educators, or with our children rather. So I think you and I should probably do an episode specifically on education, because there are some pretty progressive approaches to education these days. A lot of it coming from Silicon Valley. Peter Thiel's got a pretty interesting opinion on schools, so maybe we could do a Peter Thiel education system investigation one day and look at the way that they're teaching kids. They're basically taking kids and giving them 6-month projects. There's no Spanish class, there's no science class, there's no math class and history class. You are assigned a project, and you get a project leader, and it's a teacher basically, and it's like a teacher to every 5 kids. We know that ratio is important. And then these kids are working on these crazy, like kind of PhD type projects in terms of the amount of effort that they have to put in. And they work on it over the course of 6 months, and they explore all these interdisciplinary subjects, and they can go as deep as they want on certain topics. The kid that's interested more in science gets to go a little deeper on the science. The kid who's more interested in the history goes deeper on the history, but we can explore that another time. Hey, before we wrap up though, we were talking sports only in short form there. The NBA playoffs are going on.
Yeah.
And Steph Curry is going to take it to LeBron.
No. I'm not sure that I'm ready to throw in the towel yet. I just love everything that Cleveland represents in contrast with the boys from Golden State. But anyways, let me throw out my reasons really quick. Well, first of all, my boy LeBron has won 20 straight first round games now in a row, which is unbelievable statistic. 20 in a row. He's about to appear in his 8th straight NBA Finals, which is also something that's like, you have to go back to like.
Wait. Did you say 8th straight NBA Finals? He hasn't made it there yet, son.
Oh, he's already locked it in.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, part of it is the conference that he's playing is pretty poor. But anyways, so really what we're looking at, even though Cleveland is a progressive team and they're playing new style basketball as well, is really looking at how the game has evolved with this unbelievable 3-point shooting dominance that guys like Steph Curry kind of started and said, this is an unbelievable statistic. So I think it was in 2016 or 2015, Steph Curry from the corner made 45 out of 60 3-point shots, right? So that's 2/3. So if you do the expected value of 66.67% times 3 points being possible, he averaged 2 points on every single shot from that corner, right? That's kind of his efficiency rating. LeBron missed 1 or 2 dunks during the season, which is a 2-point opportunity. So then you do 99% of 2 points, and it's just south of 2 points, right? So it was actually more efficient and effective for LeBron or for Steph Curry to shoot a 3 from the corner than for LeBron to shoot or to dunk a ball, which is unbelievable how he's kind of revolutionized the game. Yeah,
everybody
really
talked about LeBron's freaking performance in the last series, but he was totally inefficient. He was very inefficient. The Warriors underperformed in the finals. He was inefficient. If you look at his shooting, anyways. Well, it'll be a good NBA Finals if it comes down to that. I really hope it does. The Spurs or the Clippers could put a stop to the Warriors out west. You never know. Steve Kerr is ill, man. He is seriously ill. He had a spinal surgery, and like there's fluid or something that leaked out. The guy can't even coach. He's got all the heart and soul in the world, which, by the way, you know the side story about Steph Kerr's father, right? Steve Kerr.
No.
You know the side story about his father? Mm-mm. His father was a professor at the American school in Beirut. It took place. His father was killed in the Beirut bombing that killed all those Marines as well.
Oh,
anyways, wow. That's a crazy side story on Steve Kerr. But it's going to be a good finals if it comes down to that. I hope it does.
It is a great thing for the NBA to have LeBron and Steph Curry in the finals and KD. You want to see the best players at the end of the season. That is a good thing for the NBA. We'll see. I think that health and how much energy, I think sweeping in those early playoff rounds is going to be critical because 7-game series is a grind, right? You've been to the NBA Finals. You've seen it. It's a grind to play 7 straight games and to be so close in every game. So it's going to come down to mental toughness, I think, at the end because obviously both teams have a lot of ability and it's going to come down to consistency with 3-point shooting versus can Cleveland play some perimeter D and can LeBron rise up to that GOAT Michael Jordan, kind of legendary status. So that remains to be seen. We'll see. It'll be fun.
All right. Well, why don't we close it off on that? We've been rambling for an hour now about all kinds of interesting topics, at least interesting topics to us. Kid, it's been another good beer banter episode. I enjoyed sharing a beer with you from a few thousand miles away. Got any parting shots?
Nope, just in time to finish my blue moon. I'm about to go eat some dinner with my wife. So have a good night.
Same. See you later, little brother.
All right, see you, big brother.